I am here today with Mr. Ken Scott. Ken started his career at EMI Studios, which turned to Abbey Road Studios, of course. He started in January 1964 in the tape library, soon became an assistant engineer on records like Rubber Soul and Sgt. Pepper's. And just a few years later, took on the engineer role on legendary records like Magical Mystery Tour and the White Album. Ken would soon be in great demand and find himself engineering David Bowie's Space Oddity, George Harrison's All Things Must Pass, Elton John's Madman Across the Water, and so many more. He would go on to the role of producer as well on iconic albums like Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars and Aladdin, Sane, Supertramp's Crime of the Century, and again, so many more. Ken would also produce and manage 80s new wave band Missing Persons. And he is also the author of Abbey Road to Ziggy Stardust, Off the Record with the Beatles, Bowie, Elton, and so much more. And Ken, again, words can't explain how honored I am to have you here. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Glad to be with you.
This book, it's a career, isn't it? It is a huge, huge slice of stories. So many legendary records, so many legendary artists that you've worked with. Is it everything? Is it all the stories?
Of course not.
Well, where's our volume 2, right?
Yes, I tell you, that was one of the hardest things that I've had to do, because in the studio, I make decisions just like that. I started off working on 4-track, and you had to make decisions, unlike with the technology today. But I still work the same way as I used to and still make those decisions. Whereas doing the book, I was second guessing myself the entire time. Would they be interested in this? No. Should I put it this way? That? And it worked very well with my co-writer. I would give him interviews that I had with other people and all of that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. He would then write it as he saw it. He'd send it to me, and then I'd remix it. I would take what he had and put it into, change it slightly, because I wanted it to sound English. I am English, even though I lived in the States for over 30 years. Mm-hmm. I still felt I'm a Brit, and so I wanted it to come across like that. There have been other books written by English engineers with American co-writers that have been. A lot of people over here didn't like them because they sounded American. Okay. It wasn't the person it was about. It wasn't his voice. I wanted it to be my voice. And my God, you've suddenly grown a tail.
How about that, huh?
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, that threw me for a second. Yeah, so it was great. I then put it into my voice, if you like, and he loved it, I loved it, and it worked, but it was hard for me.
Yeah, and I would imagine so. As a writer, I find it difficult. Yeah. So yeah, it's a chore, it's a task for sure. We would love a volume 2, though, just so you know.
I'll bear it in mind.
All right. And I've researched your career. I've watched every interview you've ever done. I've read all the book, and I'm on my 3rd time through. There are, there's so much to your career, and I hear so much on the Beatles, of course, David Bowie, Elton John. Those are where the focus is most of the time for you, and understandably, of course, the most iconic records of all time. I want to touch on that, but there's so much more to your legacy. It is really, I think a lot of people miss it. So I'd love to go to those little facets.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there are things that I'm sure that you've done that get forgotten. I'll put that in quotes, forgotten. people don't talk about it because the other stuff is so overwhelming. So I think I want to go there a little bit for sure. And I also want to respect your time. You have a career and resume that can go on for hours and hours and hours and hours. So I want to make it as brief as possible here for you. Do you have to? I'll start with a general question. Do you have to like what you're engineering or producing?
Absolutely.
You do.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and it's that's caused a problem in certain respects, and has been a blessing in others. I have to like something. B, I have to feel I can bring something to it. There are many acts that their sound, the way they work, is set in stone kind of thing, and I wouldn't think that I could bring anything to it, so I rejected them. But the bad side of it is that record company executives, let's just put it that way, they like to put things in little boxes. And if you have a hit with a heavy metal act, they'll send you every single heavy metal act they've got on the label, plus every other label will do the same thing. Because I never wanted to do the same thing twice, I never knew what I wanted to do until I finished a project. And quite often, let's say I did a heavy metal album, I might want to do a folk album next, and then an R&B album.
Right.
And all of that jumping around, because I'd get bored otherwise. I hate to get bored. And that's put me in the position where I've never really been in that list of record company executives' minds. Okay. So they haven't thought about me as much as maybe they could have done, should have done, whatever.
Right. Yeah. And, I would imagine you're a listener in the same way, like I am.
Not now.
Okay.
No, okay. Nowhere near as much now. It's first and foremost, I cannot abide auto-tune. I have never used it. I never will use it. And almost every record that comes out these days has auto-tune on it, and I hear it instantly, and it just immediately turns me off. So I don't listen to too much these days.
Yeah. But I mean, this room you see here has everything. It has to, like you say, I would get bored as a listener. Yeah. I need those different sensories, sound sensories to make it interesting for me.
Well, I think that's one of the things that was so great about the 60s and the 70s and early 70s. The artistry that took place, it was borrowing from all different places, be it classical, be it jazz, be it whatever, and bringing them all together and coming out with something different, which doesn't happen quite as much today. I think because everything has been so compartmentalized, radio-wise, listening-wise, and all of that. So much of today's music is regurgitating earlier stuff, which is another reason why I don't listen quite so much, because I've heard most of it before.
Right. I get that feeling myself sometimes. It's hard to be original these days, I guess.
Yeah.
Let's go to the films that are coming out. And I'm interested to hear if you've seen them, one, and what you might think of them, especially the Beatles Get Back film.
I loved it.
You did? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so pleased that the humorous side, the getting along side, was finally actually shown to people. That the first version of that was edited to show them in the worst light possible for whatever reason. I don't know why, but it's the way they were in Get Back was so much closer to what I was used to working with them. We had fun. It was a blast. They were very, very professional. They were working the entire time, but there were blow-ups every now and again. There are going to be on projects that I've done, which we have taken 2 weeks. There's been a blow-up. That's part of the artistic temperament.
Right.
It wasn't anywhere near working on the White Album wasn't bad at all. We had a blast, but all of these stories came out about how bad it was until Giles Martin started to work on the reissue of it, and he listened to all the tapes, and he came out afterwards saying it wasn't as bad as I heard. Even my father said how bad it was. Well, it just so happened George wasn't there. A lot of the time during the recording of the White Album, he was on holiday in Greece, on a Greek island, and Chris Thomas took charge when George wasn't around. And Chris and I have discussed it often, that the fact that though all those stories about it being bad were completely incorrect, we enjoyed every second of it. They all got on. They were in the studio working their asses off. It was great. It was amazing. And wow. So I loved Get Back because it showed them in the way that I was used to seeing them. And also just seeing a certain member of the recording team, his wardrobe, Lynn Johns, what he was wearing every day. It was brilliant. Absolutely. There's the Beatles in jeans and t-shirts, and he came in all of this gear every day. That was hysterical. I loved it.
It had to bring so much back for you, and that's wonderful. That's wonderful. What do you think did splinter the Beatles? You know, we often think that, you know, the White Album was the beginning of the end. That's the stigma with it. And that is not your take on it. And you were right there. What did end the Beatles?
What ends any relationship? It's they went through things that no one else has gone through before. They were so pushed together because of everything going on around them, and they wanted to be themselves, grow up, because they'd grown up together as a single entity, basically, and they needed to spread their wings, and that's what happened, and it took them apart.
And you know, that's a great segue to All Things Must Pass, I think. George, this is George. This is not the Beatles. He gets to spread his wings. He gets to do what he wanted to do, probably for years, maybe. That is a huge record. You're there recording that record. You have legend after legend in the studio there, ego after ego, you might say, too. Is there truth to that? How difficult was that record to record, and all the personalities?
Well, I was lucky to a certain extent. All of the basic tracks where all the musicians together were done at Abbey Road or EMI, where I'd already left, and they were engineered by a great engineer called Phil McDonald. Okay. Then they were still only 8-track at EMI at that point, and the studio I'd gone to work at, Trident, was 16-track. Well, George realized he needed more than 8 tracks. So he came to Trident. We put everything across onto 16-track, and then I did overdubs and mixed the album. So I didn't. The only ego I had to deal with was George's, and he didn't have one. So it was perfect.
That's great. That's great. And it's, you know, of course, it's a wonderful record. It's just legendary in its own right. Years ago, I did an interview with Sean Phillips.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that was fantastic. He contributed, of course, vocals to the Sgt. Pepper's record.
I didn't know that.
He did, yeah. And I asked him about those sessions. Were they magical? You know, that's the greatest record of all time. You know, that's the what gets put with Sgt. Pepper's, of course. Was it a magical session? He said no. It was just another recording session, you know, and but he got a kick. He remembers the one thing. They brought in 5 pianos for the final chord of A Day in the Life. And then he heard later that they brought in 24 pianos in total just for that chord.
Wherever he heard that, it's completely incorrect.
Okay.
Completely incorrect. No.
Okay. Well, what I got from that was more the personalities and the tenacious recording, perfectionist qualities of the Beatles. I want to say Paul in
Yeah,
particular.
most especially. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Would something like that take place in the recording sessions? You know, and I know that didn't, not to your knowledge, at least. But something like that, was Paul specifically, would that happen? Something like that?
On Sergeant Pepper, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things with the White Album. The other three wanted something different. They didn't want Sergeant Pepper 2. They didn't want Volume 2 of Sergeant Pepper. And I
it
think
is not.
Paul and George Martin would have done that.
Okay.
And they wanted to get back to the other three wanted more to get back to their roots, more the rock and roll, the raunchy 4-piece band kind of thing. And that threw a lot of people when the White Album came out. A lot of people hated it because they all wanted Sergeant Pepper 2.
Right.
And it took a while for it to catch on, and people realized, hang on, this is the Beatles. They always do things different every time. So this is something different. So accept it for what it is. I think in Anthology or something, there is something where Paul says, it's the Beatles. Just accept it. I can't remember his exact words. It's the bloody Beatles. Just something or other, whatever it is. And right. It's right. It's just it's them. That's what they always wanted, something different.
Yeah, and I think probably at the time, like you say, people wanted Sergeant Pepper's too. But now looking back, we're so happy, I think, that we got the White Album because it is so much them. Yes. We really feel like we get a piece of them with that, especially with that record.
Yeah,
yeah, it's fantastic. I want to move on to Pink Floyd. You worked on a few things that at the end had really a transitional period for them. The last single was Syd Barrett, Paint Box. The start of A Saucer Full of Secrets. Corporal Clegg with David Gilmour coming in. What was your impression of the band, Floyd in particular? And did you ever see them making it as big as they have at some point?
You know, that whole thing of making it that big, at the time, and no one ever thought that a band or an act would become as big as they appear to have become. The Beatles never thought they would become as big as they become. Floyd, Bowie, the fact that we're talking about them 50, 60 years on, we would have laughed you out of the studio if you'd said that was going to happen. So no one ever thought it was going to be like that. Were Pink Floyd going to be big? They already were when I started to work on them. They'd already had a couple of hits in England. They weren't as big as they became with Dark Side, but they were already fairly big. And it's another one of those things. I've been blessed, lucky, however you want to put it, to work with exceedingly talented people that knew what the studio was there for. It was to create, and they were they were all professional about that. Some of them knew what they wanted when they went in. Some of them had to search for it more, but it was all an attempt to reach an end that we all knew what the end was going to be. And we worked towards that. And it's been amazing.
Yeah. Really, really. Moving to David Bowie, the greatest studio performer ever.
Yes,
is how you have described him. Now, I've heard you also say that at first glance and listen, you didn't see David Bowie as a rock star. Very talented, of course, but not a rock star. When did that perception change for Bowie? When did he become that star that he became?
Well, let's just talk it through a bit. I first met David. He had success with the single Space Oddity, which was engineered by a guy called Barry Sheffield and produced by Gus Dudgeon, Elton's later producer.
Right.
It became successful, so typically the record company wanted an album to follow up with the success of the single. So I was put on recording the album of Space Oddity. It was put out. He was a very nice guy. I enjoyed working with him. Obviously a certain amount of talent, but I never saw him as a superstar. Didn't think he had it. Then it came to Man Who Sold the World, and they started the recording outside, came to me at Trident to do overdubs and mix it. Once again, he was a sweetheart, very nice to work with. Superstar? No. He took some time off because of the failure of both of those records at that point. And next time I saw him, he came in to produce, to record a friend of his, Freddie Beretti, who went on to become one of his fashion designers, his clothing designers. And during that session, David said to me, I had at that particular time wanted to move from just engineering to engineering and production. And I mentioned that to David, and he said, well, I've just signed a new management deal. They want me to go in and record an album. Then they're going to shop a deal. And he said, I was going to produce it myself. I don't know if I'm capable of doing that. Will you co-produce it with me? Well, my engineering career started working with the biggest band in the world. I was really put in a ridiculous place. But here I am, the next stage in my career, production, and here's this artist that I enjoy working with. He has a certain amount of talent, but he's not going to be that big. I can actually make mistakes and people will never hear them. So I immediately said, yes, I'd love to. It'd be great. And it was a couple of weeks later when he came around to my house with his wife and his publisher. And we were going through demos of songs for what turned out to be Hunky Dory. And it was during that, listening to those demos, that I suddenly realized, hang on, he could be huge. And I dropped myself in it again. It was... For me, looking back on it, I think what it was, there are two types of producer. There's the kind that dictatorial is, although there are dictatorial ones, there are those ones along that line, that it's going to be the way they want it, not necessarily or more overly what the artist wants or can do. And there's the other kind that, like I was trained with George Martin and Gus Dudgeon, that talent is put into the studio for one reason, and that's to create. And you have to allow that talent to create. Well, I don't think that David was allowed to show his creativity on the Visconti records. Okay. It was when he came in, I think he realized that because he'd had success with Space Oddity with Gus Dudgeon, who, as I just said, talent is in the studio to create. And Space Oddity was very, very close to the demo that David went in with. So it was David's ideas. And I think David realized that it's time to put up or shut up. I've got to be allowed to put my ideas across. Mm-hmm. He felt I would work with him that way correctly. And we went into, and it was because I started to hear his ideas as opposed to Tony's ideas that I suddenly thought, oh, he could be huge. Okay. And look what happened.
Yeah, how about that? Yeah, David Bowie is not a guy you want to suppress.
No.
He is.
Well, once started, no one could.
And that, but still very, very good to work with in the studio, even though, yeah.
Amazing! Look, you said. You quoted me as about the best performer in the studio I'd ever worked with. I co-produced 4 albums with him. And of those 4 albums, something like 90% of the vocals were one take, first take, beginning to end. I'd run the tape a little, he'd sing along just so I got the sound and the level. I'd go back, hit record on the tape machine, it would go through, and what he did that one time through is what you hear today. No auto-tune, no moving anything around, no copying and pasting. It's real, it's human, it comes from deep within him. 5 years, the opening track on Ziggy. By the end of it, he was bawling his eyes out. There were tears pouring down his face. He was so emotional about it. I've never seen an artist quite like that before.
Yeah. And that's why we have the David Bowie that we all know.
Yes, absolutely.
It is special. It is special. Dennis Katz didn't think the Ziggy Stardust album had a single.
Correct.
He asked David to write something else. He comes back with Starman.
Yep.
Did you agree with Katz at the time? And what was your first impression of Starman when he brought it in?
I guess I agreed with Katz. It was something that we hadn't discussed. We hadn't discussed whether we were going for a single on it or anything like that. But right. in what was on there was a cover version of Chuck Berry's Round and Round. And what happened once we recorded Starman, we just pulled that off, the Round and Round off, and just put Starman in its place. And yeah, Starman was great.
Yeah.
And
still is.
Yeah,
that's just to come back with something like that.
Well, the one thing I've never known and never will is, did David already have that written beforehand, or did he write it when told we need a single? Yeah. I don't know that.
What would you think? What is David's personality? What does that speak to? Would he have gone home and written that in a day?
Oh, it could have been either.
Either
and
one.
The trouble is, whichever you put to David, he'd agree with. It's so many times, so many things that weren't necessarily correct, and there might be different versions of it, and he'd agree with every single one of them.
He was a mysterious man.
Oh yeah,
no doubt about that. Elton John, moving on to Elton John. Briefly, Elton, we know, we've seen the Rocket Man movie.
You
right?
think you know from that?
No, but I mean,
not at all.
That's what that being my point. We see the difficult to work with, the prima donna, Elton John. There is that side that never gets shown. What's the side of Elton that doesn't get shown in those movies, and the things that we think we know about Elton?
Well, for a start, and it's not specifically Elton, but Gus Dudgeon, who was a massive part of Elton's career, not mentioned in the movie. Right. Elton's band, Nigel D. and later Davey, no mention of them in the movie. They were all. I believe that most great things come from a team that are working well together, and that the Elton John phenomenon was all started from an incredibly great team, and that's never shown in the movie.
No,
and, I have to admit, in the studio. Yes, I did see Elton's temper, but nothing to do with the recording. It was a totally separate thing where he just lost it. In the studio, it was just totally professional. He worked very much the way Bowie did. He'd be there for the basic tracks. Then he left Gus and the guys to complete it. And he didn't come, he would hear it once we'd completed recording, but then he didn't come into the mixes until the very end. And it would just be Gus and I doing the mixing. And he'd come and hear it at the end.
Yeah, that's a confidence, I think.
Yes, absolutely, which comes from a great team.
Yeah, and the confidence in that team to do him right.
Which is one of Bowie's great other great talents, is finding those teams that can give him what he wants without him having to say, "I want this." He'll play them the song, and he knows what they're going to do with it beforehand.
Yeah,
but he allowed them to put it together themselves.
It's special.
Yeah.
The jazz fusion progressive era for you, huge. One of my favorite parts of your career. In 1971, you're coming off of The Man Who Sold the World and George Harrison's All Things Must Pass. Then you do Vandergraaf generators, pawn hearts.
I don't remember anything about that. So yeah, I wish I could tell you more about that, because I've been asked about it but several times, and I honestly cannot remember a single thing about it.
Wow, because that just is a very obviously Vandergraaf, very complex,
Yeah,
very progressive, very awesome and beautiful. It seems like a very difficult record to record for sound. It's just so much. You don't remember any of that.
absolutely nothing. It's weird, because there are things that when mentioned, it will spark something, and I'll get at least a small memory or something. Oh yeah, I did do that. I don't remember doing it. I remember nothing about it.
It's an incredible record.
Okay, well, thank you.
I absolutely love that record. In 1973, you engineer the legendary Birds of Fire record with Mahavishnu.
I remember that one.
I think you revolutionized Billy Cobham's drum sound. That was the basis for everything that came after it, I think.
That's the weird thing. I asked every member of the band when I was doing the book. I asked every member of the band, why me? Because I was such a strange choice for doing an album with a band like that. Right. It didn't make. It's never quite. The initial choice has never made sense to me. Once we started, then suddenly, yeah, this is working. I get it. But to start off with, I had no idea. So no one seems to know who set the whole thing up of meeting with me to do an album. But no, it was astounding. Just them coming, everyone in the studio at Trident Studios, they'd stop by just to hear, because they'd never heard anything like it. And it was an incredible time. And yeah, recording Billy, it was quite simple. I recorded him exactly the same way as I recorded every other drummer, except I just had to use more mics. Yeah, it wasn't the typical 2 or 3 toms. Right. It was at least 8, 2 bass drums. So I just used 8 mics and 2 on the bass drum. There's yeah.
And we thank you for it, because it is revolutionary. The Birds of Fire record, Mahavishnu Orchestra, is, it's quintessential.
It worked.
It sure did. In 75, right after, well, not right after, but you engineered Visions of the Emerald Beyond, the Mahavishnu record, which changed my life. I had to learn to listen to records.
Interesting.
When I heard that, it was like nothing I had ever heard, especially the drummer, the drum sound. Narada Michael Walden on that record, then Michael Walden, then a young kid trying to fill Billy Cobham's shoes, who's probably the greatest drummer in the jazz world, at least. I know I have talked to Narda, and I know he was intimidated by that job of filling Billy Cobham's shoes.
He never showed it.
Obviously, he did not. If you've ever heard Visions of the Emerald Beyond, his drumming changed my life. And that record is just the spirituality behind the record. Everything about that record just changed the way I listened to music. What was it like? A couple of questions about that record. What was it like going from Billy Cobham to this young kid, Michael Walden, trying to fill those shoes? What was it like for you recording that?
Exactly the same.
That speaks volumes.
That's the thing. When you're dealing with professionals, it makes life very, very easy.
Yeah. And he was a professional as a young kid.
Absolutely. Now, the other thing to bear in mind is that musically it was very different from Birds of Fire.
Mm-hmm.
And needed a completely different feel and sound. It was much funkier than Birds of Fire. So he was a funky drummer, and Ralph Armstrong, the bass player, if I remember correctly, was a funky bass player. So it had a totally different feel, and once again, it worked.
It sure did. Like I said, changed my life, that record. Yeah. Recommend that record to anybody who enjoys sound. It's just great. Now, in between those, you had Apocalypse with the London Symphony, produced by George Martin.
Yeah. And engineered by Jeff Emerick.
Right. Why are you not involved in that one? I know that's 1974. You were a very busy man at that time, for sure. Why was there any word of you doing the Apocalypse record?
I vaguely remember a very brief conversation, very brief. I think it went with George more because of the orchestra side of things, which made a certain amount of sense. There was a weird time there where myself, George, and Jeff, we had these alternating things going on. It was weird. They're like, if America, the first album I did,
mm-hmm.
Second album, George Martin and Jeff Emerick.
Right.
Jeff Beck, first album I did. Bruce. Then he goes on to Jeff Emerick and George. And there are all these kind of crossovers. It was weird during that period with the three of us. Yeah. But no, he went with George and Jeff, or they went with George and Jeff. But you know what? I had gone through one of the hardest projects I'd ever done, and it was with them. It came out eventually as the Lost Trident tapes.
Okay, right.
And it was the breakup of the band. It was, talk about Beatles breaking up. No, this was what it was like. At one point, Jerry Goodman tried to put his fist through a door that thick.
Wow.
How he didn't break his fist, I have no idea. But it was awful. It was horrendous. And so I don't think, if I had been asked to do it, I would have found it very hard to say yes, because it didn't do my psyche much good working on that project.
Yeah, and that's never good for the music.
No.
Yeah. Do you feel like you took some elements from that jazz fusion time? You've done Billy Cobham solo albums and Stanley Clarke, and very into that world. Do you feel like when you say you mic'd everything the same and just more of it, but are there jazz fusion techniques with sound and miking things? Some of those different things that you did in the jazz world, did you use them in projects that came later, like Supertramp, Missing Persons, that would come in the later 70s and 80s?
If anything, it was the other way around. I would bring things from the rock pop world into the jazz fusion.
Nice.
Like there, as an example, Stanley Clarke. Every now and again, there'd be this important lick that had to come out within a piece of music he was playing, and it was so fast, it became very. You couldn't tell exactly what he was playing, but it was an important part. So what we'd do, we'd go back and we double track it, but at half speed. So he would very precisely play, and it would come out an octave up, which is what George Martin used to do with piano a lot.
Okay.
And we would do that, and then I'd mix together the very carefully recorded line with the original line, so that it still had the feeling of him playing the original, but you could actually hear every note that he played. It made it slightly more precise. So things like that were brought through. That didn't happen very often, but no, I learned very early on, because I started on 4-track at EMI.
Wow.
and the equipment we had was so limited. I learned very early on that to get a great sound, you need a really good sound coming from a studio in the first place, That's where it should all happen. From the performance to the sound and everything happens in the studio. And so I tend to do the same every time. And for different sounds and everything, it's emanating from the musician and his gear more than it is what I'm doing. I can tell him to change it slightly, but it's still. I was doing not a heavy metal, but a hard rock album with a band shortly before leaving California, and we'd come to the last couple of numbers that we were going to record. And
is this the Hellion album?
No, it's not Hellion. No,
oh, okay.
No.
I'm sorry. Okay.
No, don't worry. The producer, myself, who was my co-writer for the book, he asked me if I feel like engineering something, because I hadn't done anything for a while, and I love being in the studio. So he asked me if I'd engineer it. I said, yeah, sure. So we went in and did this, and we sat down. He, myself, and the drummer sat down, decided what kind of sound we needed for the last two songs, and we needed two completely different drum sounds. So he said, okay. The drummer said, okay. Came in the next day, and he had two different drum kits. And we said, okay, let's do song one. He said, okay, that'll be this kit. We set up that kit. I mic'd it up as I normally do. I got the sounds that I normally do, the levels and everything. We recorded, we got that basic track. Then it was on to song two. I just pulled out all of the mics. He then took his drum kit, he put the second drum kit in, I moved the mics in, and I didn't have to change a thing. And we got the completely different sound that we wanted. It comes from the instrument and the player.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a beautiful example of that. You don't do anything different, but it sounds different.
Yes,
that is proof right there.
Yeah, I've made a career of that. I haven't had to do anything.
All those secrets are no secret, right? Speaking of drum sound, well, I want to move on to the Supertramp record. The first day and a half you took just to get the right drum sound.
Yes.
Painstaking tenacity with this record. You were tenacious about getting exactly what you were looking for, as well as the band. The album took the better half of a year to record.
6 months.
Yeah. Is that the kind of record that you look back and you're most proud of? The one that really, it's just a wonderful record. Another one that changed me, Crime of the Century, of course. Is that one of those? Is that the record you look back and say, I'm most proud of that?
There isn't one.
There isn't.
There are things on lots of albums, and it changes daily. It's one day, oh, I love that album and I hate that one. Next day it'll be, I love that one and hate that one. It's that whole thing of the same way as I wanted to do different acts or different types of music. Each album I did, it's exactly the same with what I like on any given day. It will change.
Yeah, and that is a stupendous album. It is as elegant and gorgeous in every way. Supertramp records. What Crisis came next.
Yeah,
a little bit different. The recording of that one. Did you feel the same way that you did when you did Crime of the Century?
It was a lot harder, the second one. Mainly because we're following up success.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of success the kind of success we had was unexpected. Look, you for me, I never go into the studio expecting to make a huge record. I'm just going in there to make the record that I like and the artist likes, and if everyone else likes it, that's great.
Right.
But that's the icing on the cake. So we just recorded the album we wanted to, and we loved it, and it turns out the record company loved it, and a lot of other people loved it.
Yes, and still
So then
do.
we had to match up to that, and it was also harder because we did it. The band had toured America. They liked America and decided to settle for a brief period in LA. And that's where they wanted to record it. So I flew over with my family. They had all their families there. And the fact that families were around made it slightly harder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there were some tensions that came up during the recording of that project. So it was slightly harder. There are some tracks that I think are stronger and better than anything on Crime of the Century. But as an overall album, it doesn't hold up as well as Crime does.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. Pilot, huge hit with Magic. Were you involved with that record? I know I've heard that
I turned it down.
You did.
That's
okay.
how I was involved. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Was that ever a regret for you?
No.
No.
Oh, believe me, I've turned down quite a few people that have gone on to have successful careers, and no, it's I didn't see what I needed to see at that point.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. That confidence, I love that. I love that.
Well, I might have seen later, oh shit, that could have worked. I might have done it once they became successful. But what they brought to me in the first place, if I don't, I rely a lot on my inner voice telling me things that I don't necessarily understand. My original interview at Abbey Road. This was January 1964. So the Beatles were already huge in England. They were the biggest band in England. They hadn't broken the States yet. It was about 3 weeks later they went over to the States and performed. So during the interview, I was asked, who is your favorite band? Well, it was the Beatles, but that inner voice said, don't say it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, the Dave Clark Five. And the two guys looked at each other and they said, well, why the Dave Clark Five? And once again, that inner voice told me exactly what to say. Now, I know it wasn't quite the way I'm going to put it now, but it was along these lines. I believe that the addition of the sax and the keyboards to the band gives them a totally different sound to the typical two guitars, bass and drums. And they just looked at each other and grinned because I gave them exactly what they were looking for. They didn't want someone that was going to go running around getting autographs and trying to hang out with stars. They wanted someone interested in sound, which because I said what I liked about Dave Clark Five was the different sound, was exactly what they were looking for. And I've relied on that inner voice on many times, telling me whether I should do something or not do something. And one of the classics for me was Missing Persons. It was. I still don't know exactly why I started working with them. It was that inner voice saying, it's going to work. Just see it through. It's going to work.
Wow. Yeah, I want to move on to that. But I also want to ask you about the Don Harrison band. That's one that nobody ever asks about, right?
Right. Correct.
Doug Cosmo Clifford and Stu Cook from CCR, right?
Yeah. Well, they weren't part of it.
They weren't.
No, not the record I did. They played on his first album.
Okay.
But they didn't play on the second album. The second album was just Don Harrison. It wasn't the band.
Okay.
I brought in some musicians that I'd been working with, and we did that project.
Okay.
And there was one track that in LA at least started to get a fair amount of airplay on a radio station called K-Rock, KROQ.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a cover of Helter Skelter, the Beatles song.
How about that?
And they started to get the weirdest phone calls. Very strange phone call. The radio station started to get these weird phone calls, especially late at night, about this. After immediately they'd play it, they'd get these weird phone calls. So they stopped playing it.
Wow.
And that was it. We didn't stand a chance after that.
Oh, that is so strange.
Yeah, well, we know the connection of the White Album there with certain events.
Yeah, and that was a very strange time for sure.
Yes.
Missing Persons. Want to talk about that? Gail Bozio drives to your house right down the street from Frank Zappa, who she's very involved, musically with, been on his records. He is a huge mentor for her. Zappa's right across the street from you in LA. This is her story. She climbs your fence in the back with a blue box and plays the Missing Persons demo for you. Now, knowing Dale and talking with her, that story does not surprise me. I can see that happening.
It's one of those things that's sort of half true.
Right. She rang your doorbell, didn't she?
Well, the way it went, when I first moved over to LA, I didn't have anywhere to live. Just my family and I, we'd spent the 3 months doing Crisis What Crisis, went back to England, finished that, and then we loved LA so much. We wanted to, and I was doing more and more work in the States. It made sense to move over. So we move over. We start off with about the first week, I think we're in a hotel whilst we look for a place to rent, whilst we then look for a place to buy. So we find this place to rent, and I was working during the day at A&M Studios, finishing off a project I'd started, a gentleman by the name of David Batteau. And so we'd found a place to rent. We had to have the gas turned on, the electricity, the phones, all of that kind of thing. So I had to go into the studio. So I took my family up to the house we were going to rent, dropped them off, and then I went to the studio to work, finished maybe about 6:30, 7 o'clock. Drove back up to our new house that we were renting to pick my family up. I get there and there are no lights on or anything. And I didn't know what was going on. So I banged on the door and got no response. I banged harder, no response. And I started to get worried. Then I started to get annoyed. And I'm sitting in the car not knowing what to do, because don't forget, this was mid-70s. So no cell phones or anything like that.
Right.
So I didn't know what to do. So I'm sitting in the car, gradually the smoke coming out of my ears kind of things. I get madder and madder. And there's this knock on the car window. I turn around, it's my eldest daughter, and she's with another girl. I wind the window down. I said, yes. She said, hi, Daddy. Do you know someone called Frank Zappa? Yes. Oh, well, this is his daughter, Moon Unit. We're all across. He lives just over there, and it literally was across the road. Of all of the places we could have rented in LA, we happened to pick the one unknowingly opposite Frank Zappa. Ridiculous. Well, the families became close friends. Frank and I would hang out a little, but we were both workaholics, so we didn't have too much time to do anything like that. So that was the thing about living across from him, which is true. Then we eventually find a place to buy, which was 2 minutes down the road. And one Saturday afternoon, I get a phone call from Gail Zappa, Frank's wife, and she said that Terry Bozzio, who had been Frank's drummer, who I had absolutely fell in love with when I saw him perform. I thought he was astounding. And she said, Terry Bozzio and Warren Cucurullo, Frank's guitarist, and Terry's wife, Dale, have put together a band. They played it for Frank, and he thought you might be interested in it. Could they come down and play it for you? So I said, fine. And they drove down, and there was no climbing over fences. It was, they banged on the door or whatever. And I listened, and I thought it was utter shit. But that inner voice said, go with it for a bit. So I then said, well, let me come and see you play live. Well, we don't play live. We're only rehearsing at the moment. Well, let me come down to a rehearsal. I went to see it, and it wasn't quite as bad as the demos, but it still left a lot to be desired.
Right.
Once again, that inner voice, just keep going.
Wow.
And now we then went into the studio. Frank had just had a new studio built in his house, and he was a smart cookie. He knew my reputation for finding every single fault there is in a studio. So what he did, he offered us like 2 weeks, I think it was, in the studio whilst he was on the road, knowing that I would find every single fault in that studio, which would be fixed before he came home for him to use. So it was ideal. We went in there and got, I think we recorded 5 songs completed, 3 of which finished up on the album later without changing. These were supposed to have been demos. They were a lot more than just demos. And that's when I really sort of knew what the inner voice was talking about. It was at that point when we started to work together in the studio that things came together, and it was really good. But I was pushing them. I tried to get a deal for them. I went through, I think, every LA-based record company twice. We tried Australian companies, we tried English companies, and no one would touch them.
Wow.
So we finished up. We borrowed some money from Warren's parents to put out our own 7-inch EP. And we put it out. Now, during the course of this, we're also trying to get management for the band. Once again, no one was in. There would be the occasional interest, like Tina Turner's manager, Roger Davies. He was interested in managing Dale, but not the rest of the band. So that was a complete no-go. We had all these people coming by, and we couldn't find a manager. And I'm doing more and more of the managerial thing. And in the end, I said, I thought it's time to put up or shut up. And so I said, look, I would like to manage you as well. And after some thought, they agreed, and we signed. And all the people around me, my wife, my assistant, my business manager, they thought I was crazy.
What are you doing?
I was turning down production gigs to just concentrate totally on Missing Persons.
Wow.
And no one saw it until there was one evening in a club they were playing, and it just clicked. And both my assistant and my wife came up at the same gig and said, I now get it. They're great.
Wow.
And that felt wonderful. That felt so good. And thank you, Inner Voice. And it carried on from there until we'd had the success of the first album, and suddenly the egos took over, and it was they did everything themselves. They didn't need anyone else.
Yeah.
And that was bye-bye to everyone. And which, since I was, to say the least, angry, hurt, all of these, everything you can think of when it happened. But we've since sort of patched up, and Terry and I have worked together a couple of times since, and Warren and I have, because Warren later joined Duran, and he brought me in to do some work with Duran, which was great.
Yep.
And so it all got kind of patched up.
Yeah, and that's great to hear, because you put a good portion of your life into that band.
Yeah.
And we got some special record. It
was a good one. Yeah.
It really was. And the US Festival, one of the best performances I think that I've seen is especially from Terry at the US Festival, was just phenomenal. And Dale tells that story with the helicopters and the offer price. What was the US Festival like for you? She tells the story of $150,000 to play and 5 helicopters, and she wanted to refuse that and asked you to get 250 and 5 parking spaces.
What? Well, I don't remember. I don't remember that. The helicopters, there was talk about a helicopter bringing all of us from the hotel to the site, because it was hard to get through the people, and Dale wouldn't go into a helicopter. It scared her too much. So we did finish up driving. It was a strange time. They, I think, had already got that whole thing of wanting to move, thinking they'd done it all themselves and wanting to move. There was a slight tension there, which I didn't realize until afterwards. And it was fascinating. U2 opening for Missing Persons, things like that.
Yes.
Looking back on it, and just I at one point had to walk out on the stage and seeing. I actually thought it was 180,000 people, but if Dale says 150, I'll
no,
what she says.
No, the dollar amount. The band was offered 150,000 with the 5 helicopters. She said to you, this is her story. She says to you, go back and ask for 250,000 and 5 parking spaces. And you thought she was out of her mind, which she probably was. And they actually gave it to you.
Well, I number one, I'm pretty damn sure it wasn't that much money. If it was, then she owes me some, because I didn't get my percentage from all of that. No, because one of the things was I remember that it was all set up with something called a favored nation clause within the contract, which means no one's paid any more than anyone else. And I don't think anyone got paid that much.
Yeah.
Even Bowie or Van Halen. I think Van Halen, yeah.
Right.
No, that sounds like stretching it. And I look, that's something that I wouldn't have dealt with anyway. It would have been the agent that dealt with it. But no, that doesn't sound right to me. But yeah. I now understand the helicopter thing. That no, there was only one. And she refused to do that because she was scared. But no, it was strange because shortly after that was when they were in the studio mixing for the TV, because it was supposed to have all been shown on TV, and so everyone was going into the studio mixing the sound, or having their engineers mix sound. And I discovered that they'd gone in and they were mixing it without me.
Ooh.
So that's when it all started to sort of blow up a bit. So
why would anybody ever do that? They have Ken Scott with them and they're going to mix it themselves. That's just insane.
They did everything themselves, is what they thought at the time. They realized their mistake.
Wow. That is a huge mistake right there.
Look, Terry, we were talking about doing the second album, and Terry said to me, I want to play it all on electronic drums, because what was big at that time was the Phil Collins
In the Air Tonight.
Something in the Air Tonight, yes. Yeah. That drum sound, and Michael Jackson's electronic drum sound and all of that. And Terry wanted to try and stay hip with whatever was happening at that point. And he said, I want to play all electric drums. And I said, no. And he said, yeah, I'm going to do it. I said, you've got to be fucking crazy. And he said, why? And I said, because you will sound like a second-rate programmer when you are one of the greatest drummers in the world. And he wouldn't listen.
Yeah.
And that was another bone of contention between us. That kind of led to the breakup.
Yeah. And he regrets that, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You said it's the worst decision he ever made.
Yeah, and I would agree with obviously the result and the next record not the same. Kansas, I do want to touch on that. You produced the Vinyl Confessions album.
Yeah.
Another band that was in a transitional period. Steve Walsh just leaving, longtime vocalist.
The trouble was he didn't do it until 2 weeks before we were due to go into the studio, and we had no vocalist.
That is just what a nightmare. And just a really distinct voice for that band too. So a very hard guy to replace, I would think. But in the book you mentioned auditioning an Eagle, and someone that played the role of Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ Superstar. Now I put together that Ted Neely. That's got to be Ted Neely. The Eagle. Which Eagle were?
I can't remember.
You can't. Okay.
No, not off the top of my head. I can't remember.
Yeah,
but no, it was strange because there we are recording these songs, and we don't know who's going to sing it. We don't know what key to do it in or anything like that. So we just had to record and just hope that it worked. and we finished up. We found John Elefante, and it worked very well. It worked very well,
Yeah.
to the point where I think one of the songs he brought in a song as well that we recorded, one of his.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So yeah, he fitted perfectly.
Yeah, and that's great. That's great. That's a very good record. With Kerry Livgren, you're listening to Stairway to Heaven backwards.
Yes.
You very interesting. Now I know Kerry, very spiritual guy, very opposed to anything that might be dark or ungodly. So you put, and the stigma behind Stairway at the time, the stories of backward masking and things like that, which we all know is just circumstance. But you were actually hearing this. You put it to tape, you played it backward, and sat with Kerry Livgren and listened to this.
Yeah, for a couple of hours. Jeez, that must have been crazy. No, like we didn't finish. I don't think we finished actually recording till about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. Then Kerry and I are listening to this for a couple of hours. We had to be in again the next day. So yeah, it was. But no, it all stemmed from the weekend before, or the night before, or something like that, when he got back to the hotel or the house they were staying at, he switched on the TV and was watching one of the religious channels. And the pastor that was on it was saying about all of this backwards masking and all of that kind of thing. And one of the things was Stairway to Heaven. And all of the other things I could argue about. There was a Pink Floyd thing, and I can't remember what it was about, but it was a very straightforward thing. It's something to do with Sid Barrett, and calling him a silly bugger or something like that, which the pastor had taken as being the wrong terminology for the dictionary thing for bugger. Okay, the sexual side of it. It's not. It's in England, we call people silly buggers all the time.
Right.
It's one of those. And so I had to explain all that. The one thing I couldn't explain away was Stairway to Heaven. So, okay, I went out, I bought it, brought it in, put it on there and listened to it. And it was fascinating. There were things I was hearing that I could not believe. It becomes very... Maybe it was the late hour or something. I know we hadn't been smoking anything or drinking anything, so it must have just been the late hour or something like that. But we were definitely hearing things.
Yeah, and that's crazy. That's really, that's really nuts. It's great that you did that. Really interesting. The level 42 sessions, very, very difficult. You had nothing to work with. Is that the most challenging record you've ever made?
No, one of them, yes. Just because I like to have an idea. I like to have an idea of what it's going to be like at the end, because it gives me something to work towards. Whereas this, they had no songs. We went into the studio, they just jammed, picked out a section. Okay, now we'll write a song around that. And as I never had the song, I didn't know where we were going. So it became very hard. Yeah. Is there something in your discography, which is, tremendous, of course, that you really wish got more attention? For me, I look at like those little small facets that I was talking about. Dada's Puzzle album, I thought had a tremendous sound to it. It's a very, very solid record. Something like that. Is there something in the discography that people don't see that you wish they would? Oh, there are several.
Yeah,
there are a couple of bands that one of them's still around. One is just about to re-release about a bunch of stuff that we did together. One is a band called Happy the Man. Another one is the Dixie Dregs, who some of their tracks I think is the best I've ever done.
Steve Morse.
Yes, the best guitarist I've ever worked with.
Really?
Yes, I think so.
Well, and let's look at that. The best guitarist you've ever worked with, and you've worked with Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, John McLaughlin. There isn't a guitar player that isn't legendary that you haven't worked with. Steve Morse. He is the
reason I pick him is that he could play as well. They all tend to play in a certain genre, a certain style of playing. Well, Steve can play just as well in those genres, whatever, as they can. But he can also, if he felt that one note would work, just holding it through a solo, he would just play one note. He and classical guitar he plays. It's amazing. He is so good.
Yeah.
And like another guitarist, or he's not just a guitarist, but that really astounded me. The last full record I've done so far as an album. It was a guy called David Rollins and his partner Gillian Welsh, and we did it in Nashville. They're classified as Americana. It's not the type of music I'd ever worked on before, and I had a blast. I loved every second of it, and he is a brilliant guitarist as well, as apart from his songwriting and vocals and everything. And Gillian is amazing too. That's another record that I wish people knew about. It's such fun. It's great.
Yeah. And the Dregs records, for people that aren't aware, go listen to those. The Dregs, Morgenstern on drums, just a tremendous band. Great music. And we've already I cannot thank you for your time enough.
My pleasure.
It is just unbelievable, and I hope I am respecting your time somewhat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's been great.
Is there something in your life that you've always wanted to do that you haven't had the chance yet? Kind of a bucket list item for you.
You know what? I've recorded hits. I have produced hits. I have appeared on hits. I would love to write a hit, but I'm not a songwriter.
Well, that would be tremendous.
That would be amazing.
You going to make an attempt?
Oh, I did many years ago, and not so much. No, I don't think so. The inner voice said, "Give it up very quickly."
And we got to listen to that inner voice.
Absolutely,
sure. It's gotten all of us wonderful things in our lives, for sure. You can, instead of writing the song, you can give us another volume of.
I know.
No, you can enjoy your life.
I do.
Best of luck to you.
Thank you. And thank you for your time and interest.
Absolutely. We will put a link here to the book. People need to read this and appreciate what you've given the world. It's so special. This time,
thank you.
I cannot tell you the honor. It's just, I've been doing this 22 years now, and it's one of the greatest times of my career, and I appreciate you.
Thank you.
I so appreciate you, Ken. Okay. I hope we can touch base again sometime.
Absolutely. When I do volume 2. Yeah, right.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Okay. Ken, be well. Cheers.
Okay. And you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.